Hey there. So in the last video, you learned how to construct a histogram and based on different data sets. For example, you might have taken it straight from a frequency table. You might have, like you did on page 5, actually had the data here to organize yourself, and then we move the data into a histogram. So in today's video, what we're going to focus on is just how to make different observations and inferences about the histograms, now that you know how they work, okay? So we're going to dive on in here with this first example. As you know, our school is on an odd even block schedule. The graph below here shows the number of students in each classroom during the first period block one day at school. So when we look here, we see here on our x-axis, we have the number of students, and of course, we have this broken down into intervals. And then here we have the height, which shows the frequency or the number of classrooms that might have a certain number of students. So when we look at the very first question, it asks just how many first period classes are there at Irving? Well, when we look at the chart, we can see that we have 2 classes here that are pretty small and have somewhere between 11 and 15 students. Now, when we look at classes that have between 16 and 20 students, we can see here that there are 4 of those. There's also four first period classes that have somewhere between 21 and 25 students. Now we can see here that the vast majority of the first period classes, there's 8 of them here, that have somewhere between 26 and 30 students, and that's pretty common. And then there's even a few classes here, there's 2 of them, that have more than 30 students, that have somewhere between 31 and 35 students. So if we just add up all these numbers, we can see how many different first period classes there are. I chunked together here, I've got an 8 and a 2 is 10. So 10 plus this 8 is 18, and then we have 19, 20. So there's 20 classes here in the histogram. Now I want to know next, can we tell how many students are in the biggest class? And this kind of goes back to in the previous video that if you're looking at just the histogram, we don't ever know the maximum and we don't know the minimum. And so no, we cannot figure out based on just the histogram how many students there are in each of these classes. We just happen to know that there are 2 classes that have somewhere between 31 and 35 students. So no, we could not figure out how many students are in the biggest class. And similarly, if I asked how many students are in the class that's the smallest class, we can't answer that question. We don't know if it's an 11. For example, these 2 classes right here, they might both have 14 students in them, and we would have no way of knowing. Now, this question here, number 3, this is a newer type of question where we're looking at what percent of classes might fall in a certain category. And it's actually really quite simple now that we already know that there's 20 classes total. Because if I want to know what percent of the classes have between 21 and 25 students, I can just come over here and say, okay, here's the interval 21 to 25, and we've got 4 classes in that interval. So I can say 4 of my classes out of all of the 20 classes, and we can just divide and make that a percent. Now, some of you instantly can see that this reduces to a 2/10, which is going to be 20%. And friendly reminder that you can always just take the calculator and say, so the 4 that were in that category divided by the total, and that right there gives you the percentage. Okay, so this would be 20% of our classes are in this interval. Now, if I want to know how many classes have more than 30 students, we're going to go back over to the histogram. And so if I'm looking for more than 30, here's 30. So more than 30 is going to be anything on the right-hand side of this line over here, which is 2 classes. We've got 2 that are more than the 30, okay? And if I want to know then what percent is that, then we can say, okay, so 2 of the classes out of all of the classes. And again, some of you might catch that this is going to reduce to a 1/10, which is going to be a 10%. But if you don't like reducing the fractions, you can always bust out the calculator and say I've got 2 divided by 20, and there's the 0.1. And when you move the decimal over twice, that's going to be 10%. Okay? So anytime I'm asking what percent of the whatever the data is falls in a certain category, you just got to find the height of the interval over here and simply divide it by the total. Okay? Now, another fun question that you might see is like, what happens if something gets included into the data that wasn't originally included? So let's say that there was a first period class that was accidentally left out of the data, and we find that there are 32 kids in that class. So if there's 32 kids in that class, that's going to fall into this category. And what's going to happen, how will that change the histogram? That's just going to change the height of this bar right here. If there's a class with 32 students in it, this just needs to bump up to a 3. And then we would just fill this in right here. and simply change the height of that from that 2 to now it's a 3. And then if I were to look at the total, now the total actually is one more class. So in that situation, we would start to divide by 21 instead of 20 classes. And if I want to see what percent would now fall in this category, we would say we've got 3 out of the total 21 in that category. And so that percentage goes to 14%. Okay, 14%. It was originally 10% in that category, and now it's going to be a 14% in that category. So that's how we can start to kind of make some observations and inferences. We can kind of start to, once you really understand how the histogram works, you could start to manipulate the data and actually have a conversation about what's going on in the data. Now, in the last video that you guys watched, it was back a few pages, and I reminded you guys about the definition of range. It's when you take the highest and subtract the lowest to kind of just see the spread of the data. And we said that just using a histogram, we cannot find the range because we might not actually know what the highest or the lowest number is. For example, like I was saying, we don't know how many students are in these 3 classes. We don't know how many students are in these classes. So we can't actually find the range here. We can't do the biggest minus the smallest. Now, that being said, there is another data point that you might remember from elementary school, and it's called the median. And we actually can find a median from a histogram. And that's what this next part of the video is going to be about. I'm going to walk you guys through how to find the median. And a lot of times we care about the median because it's the number that's smack in the middle of the ordered data set. And so a lot of times we kind of care about, like, if there's the number in the middle, it allows us to see that half the data is kind of above it, half the data is below it. And so when we look at medians, it's just a really good indicator for what the data looks like. Now, I'm going to just remind you guys here, I have 2 example sets before we do anything with the histograms. So I'm just going to walk you guys through real quick a couple of examples of how to find the number in the middle. My strategy is to kind of just slash through them until you find the number in the middle. For example, let me just change the thickness here. There we go. I'm going to slash through the smallest and the biggest. Then I'm going to slash through here and here, here and here. And you can see that the number smack in the middle is the 6. That means half the numbers are above. So we had 1, 2, 3 numbers that were above here, and we had 1, 2, 3 numbers that were below it. So this number right here is the median. It's the number smack in the middle. Now, like this next data set, sometimes what can happen if I kind of start to slice through the numbers here, watch what happens with this one. See how we have 2 numbers right in the middle? Like if I were to keep going, now there's nothing. So what happens in this situation, if there's not a true number in the middle, what you do is you just take these 2 numbers and you add them up and divide by 2. So we would just take 10 and 16. And if I divide that by 2, it tells me what number is smack in between them. So the median of this data set would be a 13. So sometimes there's a number already in the middle, and sometimes you just got to add them up and divide by 2 to get the number in the middle. But that's all we're doing when we're talking about the median. And again, the median is just the number that's going to be in the middle. So when we have the data organized into a histogram like this, we actually can figure out where the median is going to lie. And so here what we have is a histogram that shows the number of cherries that are in each pie at a bake shop. So for example, none of the pies here, you can see that none of them have between 0 and 29 cherries. At least all of the pies have at least 30 cherries, okay? Some of the pies we could see have a ton of cherries in them, all right? Now, if I just want to know the number that's in the middle of this data set, check it out. I know that in this category right here, there are 5 pies, okay? There's 5 pies. See the height right here is the 5? There are 5 pies that have somewhere between 30 and 59 cherries in them. So if I just let this column just be represented by the letter A, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pies right here that have somewhere between 30 and 59 cherries. Now the next column here has between 60 and 89 cherries, and we can see that there's 10 pies that have that many cherries in them. So all I'm going to do here is just let this category be represented by the letter B. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Those are the 10 pies that are in this category. I'm going to keep going here. You can see what I've done, that there's 4 pies in this category, and I'm just letting them be represented by the letter C. And so if you guys want to just kind of put this down on your notes with me so that we can slash through them together, and I'll show you how to find the median. The last category, there was a lot of cherries there, somewhere between 120 and 149. There was only 3 pies in that category, but I'm going to let that be represented by the letter D. And so here we've got all of our different pies represented, and now we're ready to just kind of start slashing through them. This pie has the fewest cherries, and then this one has the most. We don't know how many are in each of these pies. It doesn't matter. But what we're going to be able to do is we're going to actually be able to see that the median falls somewhere in this category when we keep slicing through, okay? So I've gone through 3 on this side and 3 on this side. So here's a 4 from here and a 4 here, 5 and then 5. This is a 6 and a 6. I'm just slashing through here and here. And now I'm in the green category. And right here it would happen. We'd have a median right here, and you can see that the median is in this green section right here. So if I asked which interval is the median for this data set, we would say that the median is in the 60 to 89 interval, okay? The median is somewhere in there. Now I have another example over here, and you can either pause the video and just try it on your own to see if you got it right, or you can just keep the video playing and go through it with me right now. But the first thing that we care about seeing here, if we're just trying to find the number in the middle, is I'm just going to check the height of each of these. This one's a 2. We had a 4 and a 4 here. We have 8 of them in this category, and there are 2 in this category. So all I'm going to do now is, and I'm just going to put them, I was going to color code them for you guys. So let's color code here. There were going to be 2 in the first section, A and A. So that's going to be section A. Let's do purple for section B, and there's 4. So B, 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 B. Let's do green for this next section. Oops, not B, we want C here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of those. All right, now let's go with blue for this section. We'll let this be represented by letter D. So we're going to need 8 of these, okay? So I've got 1, and you can go ahead and be writing down your 8. I'm just going to turn on my cloner here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whoops. 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and one more. Cool. There's 8 of those. And last but not least, we'll just go with, it's going to be tough to see here, but we've got in yellow, we'll just do these 2 for the last section. Okay. So now we have all of the data kind of listed out. We know that there's 2 in this section, 4 there, 4 here, and so on. And if we're just trying to find where the median is going to be, we're going to say, okay, so it's slashed here and here, here and here. I've got here and here. Now I'm on 4 and 4, 5 and 5, just slashing through here. 7, 7, 8, 8, 9, 9. And right here, see what happens? Because we still have 2 in the middle. So our median is actually smack in between the 2 intervals. The median would be somewhere right here. The median is going to be right smack in between those 2. And so we would say that the interval, the median is somewhere between 21 and 30. We'll put it all the way. It's going to be between, see how I can kind of group them together? So because it falls in between those 2 sections, I'm just saying the median is somewhere between the 21 and the 30 from that one. And that's how you find the median from a histogram. You just kind of look to see the height of each bar. You kind of list them out, and you just find where the middle would be. All right, now let's flip over. And with this one, I'm just going to practice with you guys, just kind of, again, making inferences and observations. We're going to go through this hockey game example, and then we're going to go back to that cherry pie example. All right, so for this first one here, we've got a histogram. It shows the last season's hockey game attendance. So the first question we usually care about is usually the total. So how many total games were played last season? So it looks like right here, we had 3 games that had somewhere between 0 and 99 people, so not many. Now it looks like here, 8 games had between 100 and 199 people who showed up. Here, we have 6 games where 200 to 299 people showed up. And here, there's big crowds for these. You can see 300 to 399 people, and it looks like there were 3 people in this interval as well. So 3 plus 8 here is going to be my 11. Then I've got 11 plus 6 is going to be 17, and then 18, 19, 20. So it looks like there's 20 games total represented in our histogram. How many games had between 300 and 399 people who showed up? Okay, so 300 to 399, that's going to be those 3 games. And if I want to know what percent is that, now we just say, okay, so the 3 games out of the 20 games, and we can once again just divide 3 divided by the 20, and so we can see 15% of the games had more than 300 people, okay? So 15% of the games had more than 300 people. Now, according to the histogram, which of these 2 events is more likely to occur? We've got 2 options here, okay? So let's look at our first option. The first option asks if more than 200 people are at a game. So more than 200, so here's the 200. More than 200 would be this category and this category. Because obviously, if you're in the 300s, that's certainly more than the 200. So more than 200 people is going to be these 9 games. So there's 9 games out of the 20 where that happened, okay? Or less than 200 people are at the game. So less than 200 people are at the game would be this way. And that's going to be these 11. So it looks like it is more likely that there's going to be less than 200 people at the game. 11 games happened with that kind of attendance, okay? All right, now let's move on to another example. And the pie chart, or excuse me, the pie chart. The histogram is going to look familiar here because we just explored the median and found that the median was in this interval right here. For the first question, I want to know, though, again, how many pies are included in the histogram. So we had that there were 5 pies in this category because the 5 right here. We said that there were 10, so that's 15 so far. 15 plus these 4 is going to be 19, and then 19 plus these 3 is going to be 22. So 22 pies included in the bakery example. Now, if we ask which interval has the highest frequency, remember highest frequency just basically means the mode, it's the tallest bar, so 60 to 89. What are the chances that a pie will have fewer than 30 cherries? So if we look over here in the interval, fewer than 30 would be this interval right here. And there are absolutely none. There's none in that category. So there is a 0% chance that you're going to get a pie that has less than 30 cherries. They're all going to have more than 30 cherries in them. Now probability, again, kind of linking back to probability. What's the probability that you're going to get a pie that has 120 or more cherries? So again, if we look for the interval, 120 or more is right here. So that's going to be these 3. So the probability that that happens is 3 out of the 22. And we can leave that as a fraction, or we could take the 3 and divide it by 22 and see that there's a 13.6% chance that that'll happen. Okay. All right. Now for this one, for the fill in the blank, it says about 45% of the pies have between blank and blank cherries. So 45%. Now, one thing I want to point out is that we already figured out this interval. We already know this interval is 0% because there's no height. We already know that this interval was a 13.6% because we did the 3 divided by the 22. So we know it's not going to be between 0 and 29. We're not going to put a 0 and 29 here. We're not going to put a 120 and 149 because that's 13.6% chance. So basically we have this, this, and this. These are the options for the fill in the blank. So we're going to check to see, let's check to see if this should be the 30 and the 59. We're going to check to see right here. We're going to check to see if this is the correct interval, if that's actually 45% of the data. So there were 5 pies that were in that category. So 5 out of my 22. And basically we're just going to check right now to see if this is 45% of the data. If I do 5 divided by 22, we can see that that's 22.7, about 23% of the data. So that's not going to be the correct thing for filling in the blank, okay? So we know it's not this interval because that interval contained 23% of the data. We're looking for 45% of the data, so now let's check this one. There are 10 pies out of 22 pies that have somewhere between 60 and 89. So let's see if 60 and 89 is the correct thing for filling in the blank here. All right, if we do 10 divided by 22 totals, there we go, 45.4. So that is about 45% right here. This is the 45%. And that kind of makes sense because 45% is almost half. That's almost 50%. And you guys know that half of 22 is 11. So this is almost half, which makes sense. So we found the right interval here for the fill in the blank. And now we can move on. All right, for the last question, which interval has 2 more pies in it than the 120 to 149 interval? So the 120 to 149 interval was this last one right here, and it has 3 pies in it. We want to know which interval has 2 more than that. So what's 2 more than the number 3? Duh, it's 5. So that's going to be this one right here. And that was the, I can move the X out, that was the 30 to 59 interval, 30 to 59. That's the interval that has 2 more than the 120 to 149 interval. So what we've done in this video is just continued to practice analyzing these histograms. And I would say that the big thing that we covered is like the probability questions, like what's the probability of something, or what are the chances. The percent questions were the big thing that we covered here. Back on pages 6 and 7, we talked about the percentage questions. And we also talked about what happens if you maybe include a data point and how it changes. We also talked about how you find the median in a histogram. So we learned a lot in this video, and what you guys are going to do now is you're going to move over to this page in your packet and you're going to practice. And then there's also going to be another separate practice worksheet for today that you're going to turn in. All right? So that concludes this video. Thank you for watching.